You'll see how fast I can do this. Okay, we're recording. So today we're on deference. The question I have for you guys on deference, this is putting others ahead of yourself, is Jesus led by deference. We don't often think of that, but he did. So the question then is how does Jesus want us to lead?
Yes, like he.
Not like him. And if he led by deference, then you can conclude, what's that? Yes. Deference is also talked about in other books. You'll talk about like servant leadership. And I think servant leadership is, I have several books on servant leadership. Sometimes it's misunderstood as being one who unclogs the toilets when they get clogged. That's not necessarily the case. Servant leadership is actually taking the initiative to resolve conflict or a problem. And that's, and when you're dealing with people, it's often being a peacemaker. In fact, God throughout Scripture is looking for a peacemaker. I did counseling training many years ago, and it's called Peacemaker. And it was about how do you resolve conflict through two different groups of people. It was a great bit of training for myself because I really didn't think much of it. But I was in ministry and I knew that people had conflicts. And so I wanted to know, how do I better help people through conflicts? Peacemaker ministry is not just used in churches, it's also used in the secular world because people recognize if you can make peace, things are better. So let's go ahead and look at a couple of verses. We're going to be looking at Romans chapter 14. And I clicked on the wrong thing. Every single week. I don't know if there's a week where I have not done this yet. Okay, now let's try it. All right. Romans 14, verses 18 through 21. For he who is in this way serves Christ is acceptable to God and approved by men. So he, and we're going to get into this a little bit more, what the he is, but people that please God and please other people who find favor in the people act this way. Let's see what this is. So let us pursue the things which make for peace and the building up of one another. Those who are peacemakers are going to be they're the ones who serve Christ. They're going to be the ones who are acceptable to God and approved by men. So other people will listen to them. You'll have greater influence. You'll be honored by God. God's going to be pleased with you. Do not tear down the work of God for the sake of food. All things indeed are clean, but they're evil for man who eats and gives offense. So understand, Paul is writing to the Israelites. I meant to look this up before I did this, but in Rome, you have two different people. You have the Jewish people and you have the Gentiles, part of the church. And then the emperor, I think it's like Claudius, comes in and he kicks all the Christians out of Rome for 5 years. There's no Christians in Rome. And then they come back 5 years later. But the problem is they're coming back, you have these two different groups of people, and there's this conflict. They kind of have their own system of doing things and their own little special beliefs. For example, the Jews were saying, hey, you can't eat meat that's sacrificed to an idol. It's wrong. There's just something wrong about this. We cannot do it. And the Gentiles are going, no, it's just a piece of meat that was sacrificed. I didn't sacrifice it. Somebody else sacrificed it. And they're sacrificing it to a piece of wood. It's not even God, a real God. It's just a piece of wood. So the Jews and the Gentiles are having this conflict. Now, biblically speaking, the Gentiles are right. It's just a piece of meat that was sold. There's nothing wrong with eating the meat. However, it was hurting the consciousness of the Jews. And the Jews are saying, no, you can't do this. And so Paul's writing to them saying, look, don't let food divide you guys. Don't let it, and he talks about this in 1 Corinthians, don't let it be a stumbling block to your brothers. Give it up. Set it aside. Don't buy sacrifice meat. Yes, I know it's cheaper at the market. Maybe it's a really good cut. But it's not worth this conflict that's divided. Give up your right for your brother. It is good not to eat meat or to drink wine or to do anything by which your brother stumbles. So, don't do anything that might cause you to stumble or cause your brother to stumble. It's why when I go out to a restaurant, I really like strawberry margaritas. However, you won't see me in our area. If I'm on Hawaii, I might get one. getting a strawberry margarita. Primary reason is because I know some people struggle with alcohol. I don't want them seeing Pastor having a drink and then therefore saying, well, maybe I can have a drink. No, it's just, I don't want to cause any stumbling in your life. So I'm just going to refuse to give up my freedom for that sake. Now, truthfully, I don't really like the alcohol in the margaritas. I just like the sugar and the food coloring if I've got serious about it. So it's really not that hard for me to give up. So I give that up. I give up the drink for that reason. And also because I don't want anybody holding it against me. Because if I have a drink at the Mexican restaurant and somebody walks in and sees me, and then another family walks in and sees me, and another family walks in and sees me, suddenly it went from having one drink to having 3 drinks that night because 3 different people saw me. And so therefore it went from one, because it's really just one drink, to 3. So yeah. And the truth is, biblically speaking, I could have a beer. I could have a glass of wine. Jesus had wine, but it doesn't say he got liquored up. And so I could have those things, but because I don't want others to stumble or to struggle, I choose to give up that freedom.
I told a story back in the 60s. My dad liked to play pool, but the only place to play pool was in the taverns. Dad didn't drink, but he used to go down to the taverns to play pool. And my uncle pointed out to him one time, he said, you really shouldn't do that for that very reason, because he will see you going in there, Dad, at this moment. Don't drink. And my uncle says, yeah, but people don't know that. They just see you walk in there. So Dad never went back in.
Yeah.
Shortly after that, he bought his own pool table.
That's right. Bought his own. I got to play whenever he wants. All right, let's go to Romans 15. Now, we who are strong ought to bear the weakness of those without strength and not just please ourselves. So look, because we are strong in our faith, we're going to go ahead and bear the weakness. I'm going to give up my freedoms for you weak people because this is a stumbling block. And so I'm going to give this up because I'm not going to do this for myself. I'm doing this for you. Moving on. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good, to his edification, to building him up. That is the purpose of Christ, to building up man, to saving them. That's what he calls us to do, to be peacemakers. Let's go ahead and go straight to number 1 here. Deference is the character trait of putting someone else's rights, needs, and opinions ahead of our own. So, deference can also look as being a servant. One who is a servant. Jesus was a servant to all of mankind by offering up his life on the cross. That's how he was a servant, so that by faith we may be saved. He was therefore creating peace. Okay? So, if you're to talk about how is Jesus being a peacemaker in our lives? Explain to me as if I had never heard it. I kind of gave you some of the tools there. How is Jesus a peacemaker for you?
Well, he changed me.
Okay.
And he never calls me anything negative. He always tells me he loves me. I never hear anything negative from him. He always builds me up.
Mm-hmm.
With my weakness, I made strong through him.
Okay.
His grace is sufficient for me. And he fixed my brokenness.
So he fixed your brokenness. So before you were a follower of Christ, were you a friend of Jesus?
No, I was his enemy.
So you were his enemy. So
by my actions. I knew him. I've been baptized, but I don't believe I was ever saved.
Okay. So you were his enemy. And what did Jesus do despite you being his enemy?
He just kept loving me.
And what specifically did he do, Gary?
Forgive.
He forgave. And what did he do in order to be able to forgive us? What is that?
He sacrificed himself.
Yeah, he sacrificed himself. So he's a peacemaker. Jesus was a peacemaker to the point of taking him to dying on the cross so that he might save us. That's how great of a peacemaker he is. And we are called to be like him. Are we willing to die for our enemies to make peace so that they may make peace with God? Are we willing to sacrifice that much in order to make peace?
Biblically speaking, they might be, but fleshly speaking, I don't think I'm willing to go all in that much.
Well, there's a difference.
I know who I am. And
I get it.
I actually posted some negative stuff on Facebook today because I'm just sick of hearing how another black man got shot. Well, quit breaking the law and he won't get shot. You know, you can go tear up the cities of this nation and then one of you gets shot over it. Well, you know, you brought it on yourself. I'm tired of this whole thing. Anyhow, so yeah, as far as I kind of feel like we should be picking sides right now. We're going to be for God or we're going to be for the mob.
So the question is then, well, how does God want us to pick sides? When we're part of his army, what is he calling his soldiers to do?
Well, I understand the point of trying to make everything right through love. But when love doesn't work, I think you got to be smart enough to defend yourself as well.
So we'll get into that.
How many people did King David kill? He was a warrior.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of David in me, and there's a little bit of Peter in me. But at the same time, there's a lot of Jesus in me, and I am a forgiving person. But
so the question then is, you got to remember, David was called by God to do certain things.
Yeah, and that's why he didn't build the temple.
Yes.
He shed too much blood.
So we want to be careful. So let's get into a little bit what God's calling us to do, because I get where you're going with that. Here's something that will tell us a little bit about ourselves. Number 2, only strong, confident, secure people are able to practice deference consistently. There is a time to protect our families. If someone breaks into your home in the middle of the night and you use a gun and shoot them, according to the book of Deuteronomy, you are not guilty of murder. However, if somebody breaks into your house in the middle of the day, nobody's in any harm, and they steal your television, they're running off and you shoot them in the back, then you are guilty of murder. There's a time to protect. Jesus tells his disciples, they say, hey, Jesus, we're going to go on this journey. We're going to go through some tough territory. Should we bring any swords? He says, well, how many swords do you have with you? He says, well, we have 2 of them. He says, that's enough. Let's go. You know, there's a time in which you can protect yourself, protect your family. However, when Peter goes out and they're going to arrest Jesus, and Peter goes over and cuts off the ear of the no, it wasn't a Roman soldier. It was he was with them, the Pharisees. Scribe or something like that. And he heals his ear, and he turns around before he even healed. He says, Peter, put the sword down. Live by the sword, die by the sword.
Right.
So you got to understand, there's a point in which he is trying to make peace, and Jesus is saying, I'm going to sacrifice myself to make peace. And I am giving this up. This is a freedom that I'm giving up. I don't have to die. I could die. I could call my armies right down right now and just squash everybody who resists me. But he didn't. He chose to be a peacemaker. So people who are strong and secure, they're able to make peace, especially in arguments. They're willing to defer. Now, and I'll get a little bit into this, what that is. I like to win arguments all the time. I am the king of arguing. However, it is taking much practice for me not to win arguments. I will state truth as it is. I will not continue on in arguments over and over and over all the time. Even if somebody disagrees, at some point in time, I gotta go, you know what? I love you. This is obviously an area where we don't agree. I love you nonetheless. I am willing to take on and say, yeah, I'm at fault in certain areas. Even if I'm truly not at fault, or I don't feel that I'm at fault, I'm willing to take on some fault. Let me tell you guys a little bit of a story. There was a man who was listening to, D. Duke was talking about it. It says he had a guy who wanted to be a pastor in his church, be the youth pastor. And this is when his church was like 100 people. The guy came in and said, I want to be the youth pastor. D. Duke said, great, that's good. Let's work on this. Let's think about this. And this guy worked as a salesman and car salesman. And shortly after, he was selling a car to an individual. He got everything prepped. He did make sure all the mechanics of this car, everything was all put together, and he's going to make the sales. Another employee swooped in and stole the sale from him. And this guy was rightly upset. And so he went to his boss and said, this guy just did this to me. He just stole my sale. And the boss said, let it go. He said, I can't let it go. So he went and talked to D. Duke. Said, this is what happened. Explained the situation. D. Duke says, okay, do you still want to be a pastor? Yeah, I still want to be a pastor. She said, you need to let it go. I can't let it go. If I let it go, then I'm putting a target on my back and these guys are going to walk all over me. He says, look, if God is, D. Duke says, if God is dead, then take care of yourself. If he's not dead, trust him and make peace. And he said, I can't do that. So he went back to work. He complained more to his boss, had some conflict with his coworkers, ended up getting fired and never went into ministry because he never learned the art of actually making peace with other people who didn't understand the importance of being a peacemaker. And it's a hard lesson, especially for me who likes to win. By nature, I have rights and I recognize that my body is saying, no, I'm not going to give those up. But we need to learn how to be peacemakers. Now, those who faithfully practice the basic disciplines of the Christian life of, you guys know this, reading Bible, or Bible reading, prayer, giving, gathering, worship, seeking wisdom, the self-examination, they're the ones who are going to grow in a relationship with God. They're the ones who are going to learn how to be peacemakers. So I'll cover that second half in just a second. Did you guys already fill these ones out? So let's look at this. If you're reading Scripture, then you're reading and seeing throughout Scripture how God is a peacemaker and how he is gracious to the point that he held up his judgment for hundreds of years. Gracious to the point that he was willing to, that his son sacrificed himself on the cross. That is how gracious he is. You look at the life of Paul. Paul was a very gracious man who's telling other believers he didn't give up parents and gave up many of his own rights. If you're in prayer, then God will convict you. God will talk to you. God is leading you. You're able to build. You're going to be frustrated and upset. You know, this guy is walking all over me. This guy is being a jerk. And it's having that prayer and talking to God about that. Giving. See, when you give, you're thinking of others. Not just to the church, but you're putting the needs of others above yourself. Gathering, it's where you're coming together and you're being encouraged by other Christians. Worship. It's where you're getting a right view of God and a right view of yourself. See, oftentimes we reverse it. We have God here and ourselves here, so therefore we must fight for all of our freedoms. Fight for all of our rights. It's having a right view and saying, no, what I really need to do is I need to make myself right with God and lead others to be right with God. Because if everybody's right with God, then we're all going to be taking care of each other's rights. It's elevating everybody up to being right with God. Seeking wisdom from other Christians. Even when it's hard and we don't want to hear it, self-examination, saying, God, am I doing this for myself? Or am I doing this for you? Am I fighting and having this fight because it makes you, glorifies you, God? Or is it because I got to win this argument? And then oftentimes I find that this is where most people will begin to come up with reasons why this glorifies God. But biblically, it begins to break down. But this is where most people get stuck at. So we have a growing relationship with God that allows God to give them security and self-worth. When we make God our king, when we give our wrongs that are done to us to God, he becomes our security. He becomes our defender. He's the one who values us. I don't care what other people think of me. I mean, truthfully, I do. That's a battle that I always have. I care what other people think about me. But I am learning to care more about what God thinks of me than what people think of me. So people can think I'm a whip, and that's okay. But I'm going to speak boldly about God's word even when it contradicts everything our society says. Because that's what humanity is. Humanity is not a peacemaker. It's a warrior maker. We fight for everything. This also tells us a lot about our trust in God. See, remember when we talked about anger, when a husband is angry, a wife has a hard time submitting to their husband because they're angry, they're volatile, they never know what they're going to come home to. So they have learned to pull back and not submit because they got to take care of themselves. They got to protect themselves because they can't trust their husband to do that. So now they're saying when they have a husband who loves them, who encourages them, who builds them up, then they can learn how to submit. The Christian life is the same thing. It's learning to trust God. It's submitting to Him. Probably the hardest thing to do because it means we're giving up some control, but we're finding our security no longer in myself. I'm finding my security in God. I'm finding my self-worth in Him as well. When God is pleased with our walk with Him, we will sense a pleasure in our hearts and we will have His joy in us. I no longer care what others think of me. I only care about what God thinks of me. And when God is pleased with me, then it gives me joy. If I want the rest of the world to be pleased with me, then I won't ever have that joy because the rest of the world will never be pleased with anything I do. Maybe for a short time, but not in the long run.
Paul, what's that word there? The P word? Sorry.
His pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, a little blurry for you guys.
It's just the glare for that tail end.
Got it.
The lights reflecting off of it and the windows.
Yeah. What are you saying?
I said, I think I can honestly say that statement. I don't care what people think about me. Because all I care about is what He thinks about me. Now, before in my old life, I wanted to please everybody. And it really hurt me when people didn't like me. And now I'm at the point to where you don't like me, I'm not going to waste my time to try to make you like me. So if you don't like me, go on your way. I'm going to please God. I don't care. And I guess that's why I'm so bold about Jesus too. I just speak about Him wherever I go. People don't want to hear it.
I want to be a peacemaker, but I'm not to the point of sacrificing, pleasing God. I want to please God first and be a peacemaker. Yeah, I get that. I see where you're coming with that. So when we get to heaven, who's going to be considered the greatest in heaven? Who, aside of Jesus, who will be considered the greatest of humans in heaven?
It's going to be based on your works, what you did here for God, why you're on this earth, and then they'll be rewarded. I mean, I'm pretty sure Rabbi Zachariah and Billy Graham are going to be at the top. I mean, people that really spent their life serving God and doing His purpose on the planet, I think, will be the most rewarded.
And those are people who I say are going to be the servants. They were servants. They truly were servants.
Yes.
And that's hard to learn because they sacrificed. They learned how to sacrifice. They learned how to defer really, really hard. I don't know when I brought him up the last time because I don't have it written down, but I think of Martin Luther King Jr. He was one of the greatest men in the last 60 years to live who was known as a servant. And he served. He tried to create peace with the civil rights movement, the blacks. I mean, he saw an injustice. He didn't say we should let injustice go. There's a difference there. He didn't say, oh, we should just not have justice. But his movement to making a change was done peacefully. When people wanted to get mad and angry and get in his face and hold guns and fight him, he didn't fight. They got arrested. They went to jail. They got beaten on. Sounds a lot like Jesus.
And another thing, he always protested in the daylight. He never protested at night.
Yes, he was very aware, and there's a lot of quotes that he has about looting and stuff, and how that and violence, how it destroys everything. He understood peace. If anybody understood, it's the difference of why I don't support Black Lives Matters as an organization. I do think Black Lives Matter. That's not an issue for me. Yeah, but I mean, I get that I have a friend who's a black pastor who does get harassed when he leaves his community, goes to another community, because he lives in a poor community, and the police department does harass him because they don't know that he's a pastor in that other community. Yes, and they've had things where he's had really negative things done to him in front of his kids from police officers. So I get that those things happen. There's a truth to that.
That happened to me right here in this town. Just cop kept following me and getting behind me all the time. Finally, I just pulled over at the post office, walked up to him and introduced myself and said, "Hey, man, my name's Brett Finger. I'm on my way down to youth ministry. Why do you keep getting behind me?" And he says, well, my name's Caleb. And you ever think that this is a small town and I'm just going the same way you are? Told it to my PO. He looked it up on the computer. He said, man, your Facebook ran a lot last month. He said, that guy was out after you. And he was stereotyping me because of a muscle shirt. And, you know, he just figured I was up to no good. So it doesn't just happen to black people.
No, and I get that.
That's what Black Lives Matter is about.
Yes.
That's a big part of it.
There's Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter the movement.
Black Lives Matter, the movement, I do not support. Black Lives, I support.
Right.
That's why Matthew J.W. No, I messed up. Was it?
Yeah, it's like
J.W. Matthew Hensey, something like that. Now I can't say his name. Now that I want to say it, he's who I pray for. He's a black pastor in Portland. His desire is much more like not Rodney King Jr. I just brought up his name. Martin Luther King. He's much more like him, you know, where he's trying to create peace between the people who are protesting and the civil authorities. And so he's trying to be a peacemaker. So that's who I support. That's who I pray for. That's who I think is doing things rightly. He's being a peacemaker. And so he is a strong man in my mind. And he is great joy because he's doing the right things. I think he's going to be honored in heaven for this. Moving on, I can go a long time on this. Our personal rights are a major cause of conflict between us and others. Want to get me mad? Go after my personal rights. I will want to protect them tooth and nail.
What Biden's doing for him.
It's in my nature. Yeah, but my way, I can protest against it peacefully.
Yeah.
I'm voting, I'm not voting for him. And I'll gladly let people know, but how I say things on Facebook is just as important as what I say.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes we fail, our mind is right, but the mechanics of doing something are wrong. And that's what causes problems. And how we respond to people is what causes problems and turns people off. In fact, we will often try to convey things and force our view by forcing the argument of character. We think that will change people, when oftentimes what it does is it turns them off. What I need to do is I need to appeal to their consciousness. And it's a real art of understanding how to do that, that they will feel bad. I'm going to feel bad for voting for Biden. Not you should understand what the consequences are going to be. And when people harm me, I got to appeal to their conscience so that they feel guilty and let the Holy Spirit working on them. Yes, and it's not a manipulation, but I know that the other style of arguing and fighting doesn't produce anything. It's what we want to do, though, because that's our natural reaction. Our natural reaction is to fight. If Mason and I, we don't fight as much anymore. We're pretty good about that. But there was a point in time when he and I fought with each other. We both wanted to point each other and we were right. And I wanted to win those arguments because I was dad and he had no right to win. And I was going to make sure he lost no matter what. And even if he did win the argument, he was going to lose because I was going to take away anything that he might enjoy. So he lost no matter what.
I actually do 1 out of every 10 arguments. I try to get my way now. And I started to realize that if I stop myself and ask, what's my motivation? Is it personal? Or is it something that's factual that can lead them in the right direction? Then I know that, like, if I'm asking my son to mow the lawn and he doesn't do it for a couple of days and then I go out and start doing it, I know that his belief in wanting to help dad will take over, and then his disobedience will be put aside, and I can't play PlayStation for the afternoon, but at least I'm hanging out with dad and I get to help him. So it intrigues him to want to help me more and wake up earlier and do those types of things.
Yeah, guilt.
What's
Guilt
my motivation?
Guilt for not doing what is right, it does have an effect. And I understand what you're talking about, because if I ask my kids to do something, ask my kids to do something, ask my kids to just do something, they don't do, and I start doing it, then suddenly they know I'm doing it. They're like, wait, why are you doing it, Dad? Because you didn't take care of it. I got to take care of it, and then they feel guilty, and then you won. Then you won. So I'm winning. I'm just winning in a different way. I'm winning by making peace and appealing to their conscience. Number 6, deference is yielding our own personal. It's yielding our own personal rights for the sake of unity and love. It's giving up that drink, giving up that sacrificed meat. It's trusting God. Yielding is hard. That's against our skin and physical flesh nature. Number 7, God gives great authority to those who practice deference. You want influence. Deference will help you have that. There are multiple verses on graciousness versus being pugnacious. That we are to be gracious people. And then therefore we will get more authority. The most gracious person on earth is Jesus. And he's had the most influence of any man ever. And 100% man, 100% God. So, want influence? Be like Jesus. And then that also, you think about people who've had great influence and have had great authority. So we brought up Billy Graham, Martin Luther King Jr. Both of those guys have had great influence. And so, because they had a lot of deference or practice deference, the result of what they had done is going to carry on into eternity, into heaven. But you have people who like Steve Jobs, who was a total jerk, and there's books written about him, about how he was a jerk. He had a lot of influence here on earth, but understand his influence is limited, and it's definitely not eternal. I mean, it won't matter in 2,000 years, and for eternity, it doesn't matter at all. But those guys, they changed the world so much so that we have a holiday that celebrates one of them, and we talk about him and teach about him in school. Number 8, our anger is usually an indication that we're feeling that our personal rights have been violated. Why do I want to fight? Well, because our personal rights have been violated. That's true. Well, if I let my personal rights violate, then they'll walk over me. Yeah, it might. It might walk over you. You might lead them to Christ because of the way you act, just like Martin King. I can't say his name anymore. Was that his rights? He got walked over, and yet he had influence.
If you think about it, if somebody's going to walk all over you, that means they have to walk in your shoes.
Yeah.
So if you're headed in the right direction.
And I'll tell you, there's something that so there's a side note on this one. Where's that? It's in my pocket. So there's a vindictive side of me that thinks like this. Okay, so if you were to wrong me, imagine that these are wrongs, and you were to wrong me. I collect these wrongs, and this is my wrong. So when I take my wrong here, you owe it to me. You owe me to make things right. And I take my wrong and I give it over to God. I say, all right, God, you're a king. You take my wrong, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to be the peacemaker. I'm going to give you the wrong. You know what? That person still has to make up for that wrong. And instead of making it up to me, you know what they have to make it up to? God. God is my dad. Okay, you got a bully who's picking on your kid, and now that bully's going to be confronting the dad. Dad's not going to be too happy. Now this dad here, particularly, he's really not happy. And there's consequences to that. Even consequences to those who are believers. Now that person may not go to hell, but they're definitely losing their rewards. So they can still lose things. So there's a consequence to that. It's kind of what keeps me in check a little bit, making sure that I'm nice to my wife, because I got to remember that, yeah, she's my sister in Christ, but she's also the daughter to my father-in-law. So I don't want to have a father-in-law that's upset with me, because mistreating his daughter is not a good idea. Number 9, those who grow in the character traits of deference become skilled at sincerely honoring others. So how do we honor others?
Blessing, building them up.
Serving them.
serving them.
Like
Yeah.
that.
Yep. I had a conversation on Facebook also over the same matter that you're talking about, the black gentleman who was killed. Not killed, he's just shot. I don't think he's died.
No, he ain't dead yet.
Okay, so hopefully there's no yet. But he's not dead. He's shot 7 times in the back. However, I watched the video, and so when I saw this happen, I tried to talk to this young gentleman on Facebook. He's upset. Black Lives Matter. And I said, there's all things that we're not taking into consideration. We're not law enforcement. But there's things that we don't know what's going on. We don't know when that man was going to the vehicle and getting inside. The police don't know if that's his vehicle. They don't know whose vehicle that is. They don't know if he's got a gun inside. In fact, he said previously, I have a gun in my car. They don't know he's going to go get the gun and shoot people. We're not taking those things into consideration. And he got mad at me, and he blew up. And it was a conversation that went every time he would make an emotional and even accusational conversation with me. He got really upset. I tried to make sure that I was kind and gracious with him and said, no, that's not the point I'm making. I understand you're upset about this. We looked at this and asked questions, and I realized that it wasn't going anywhere. So in the end, instead of winning the argument, and I would have lost even if I had, I determined that the best way, even though I was trying to be as gracious as I could, I said, you know what? I think I need to stop this conversation because of my inability to communicate clearly, my inability to express what I'm trying to say. This is my fault for not being able to communicate these things. It would be better for me to go ahead and stop. If you'd like to go ahead and say anything, I would gladly read what you want, what you write, but I'm not a good communicator. Disengage, yeah. So I took all the blame myself. I said, I'm not a good communicator. Am I a good communicator? I think I'm better than he is. But I took the blame. I'd rather honor him. And in some ways, I put some ash on his head. That wasn't my intent. My intent was, though, to make peace.
What was that right before others I can't see? Sincerely.
Oh, honoring.
Honoring. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Number 10. God will become the defender of those who yield their rights for the purpose of unity. We kind of covered some of this, so I won't get back into it. Now, who do you want to fight your battles? Do you want to fight your battles, or do you want to let God fight for you? By the way, you could lose, he can't. I mean, seriously, if I was going to get in a schoolyard fight, I'd rather get Mike Tyson to make the fight for me. So if that kid tries to fight Mike Tyson, they might lose in here.
That's
Son,
good.
who is Mike Tyson? He was a boxer.
That's a good one.
Like Muhammad Ali or George Foreman.
I will take any of those guys.
Michael did bite your
Ear off. I'll explain that. I'll explain that reference to you later on.
I bet he would round pound them.
All right, number 11. Those who have grown in the character traits of deference will become increasingly more gracious in their speech. You learn to be gracious. Okay, so there's a Tim Tebow when he was playing for the Denver Broncos. He was getting ready to. He was in the end zone, and he was playing against, I don't remember who it was, but the guy, but it was the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he was in the end zone, and his opponent came up and he tackled him in the end zone, just knocked him down. And then when he got up, they had Tebow mic'd up so they could hear everything, and the guy was just trash talking him right there. And Tebow didn't say anything. So the game goes on, and at the end of the game, Tebow makes a pass into the end zone, a winning pass, wins the game right in front of his opponent who just trash talked him. And everybody heard this. It was on the TV. It was broadcasted. And so they go to they interview Tim Tebow later on that afternoon. They said, hey, we know what this guy did. We heard when he tackled you. We heard what he said. It was broadcast. Everybody heard it. So when you threw that winning throw right in front of him, what did you say to him? Like, you must have said something. And Tim Tebow says, yeah, God bless you. And I look at that as gracious in speech. That is what Tim Tebow showed. And all the conference people, they just laughed. I mean, that almost is like pouring coals on his head, on that guy's head. But he was gracious to him. Finally, last one. Those who have grown in character traits of deference will be exalted by God. Want to be exalted, lifted up, honored, have more influence? Be a person of deference. Don't want those things? Then don't be a person of deference. And that wraps us up for this evening.
Ephesians 5:25.
Yes.
To the end of recording.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end the recording now.
Okay, let's compare this week's verse compared to last